everyone again for joining us for the October community call. We know folks, have so many Zoom meetings that they're attending these days, so we definitely are grateful that you choose to spend an hour or so each month with us. And welcome as for the first time on Zoom, we're piloting this new format for our community calls to hopefully make them more engaging. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll definitely open to feedback. So with that, I will kick things off, firstly by just introducing our team. So putting a face to a name, if you haven't seen me in person before, my name is Alyssa Talabot. I'm a senior field manager here at CRAC. And if you're returning to our community calls, you should have seen my name for the most part. But with that, I will kick it off to Sina.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. This is Sina Sam. I'm the partnership manager, and I am joining also in person here, video, from Washington State. And I will pass it to Gina.
Hi, everyone. Gina here, CRAC's Field Associate. For those of you who were part of CRAC's first ever digital advocacy training, hello again, I'm back. Can't get rid of me. I'm joining you here today from rainy Washington, DC, so great to see all of you back again. And I'll pass things off to Phoebe.
Thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. My name is Phoebe. I'm CRAC's Operations Manager, and I'm also joining in from DC. We're going to be going over logistics really shortly, and that'll be covered by Gina.
All right, so for those of you who have been on some of these Zoom webinars just generally, I'm sure you know the deal already. Everyone is going to be placed on mute just to make sure that any background noises are taken care of while Alyssa and Sina and any of our other speakers will be talking. If you want to comment or throw something into the Q&A for later, you have to be logged into the webinar. And feel free throughout to ask comments and questions throughout the webinar. You can use the chat function for either questions or comments, or throw questions into the Q&A, and we'll answer those at the end of this webinar. And as you can see on this control panel, you have the chat box, the Q&A box, and the option to raise your hand, which we can get to at the end of this meeting if you want to audibly share out any questions or feedback you have. And with that, I'll pass it off back to Alyssa.
Thanks, Gina, and hopefully folks like this Zoom format a little bit more. It's a little more intuitive than GoToWebinar, which we know can get a little bit chunky. But for today, I'll just go over the agenda really quickly. So the first thing we'll go over is civic engagement initiatives. So this is the kind of title I tried to piece together, all the different things happening on the national landscape through election, census, and the Supreme Court. Then I will go over COVID-19 relief or lack thereof, and then I'll hand it over to Sina to go over some timely partner campaigns that are happening and how you can get involved to support them. And then, as Gina mentioned, we'll wrap it up with Q&A at the end if we have time. But I will hand it back to Sina as we kind of continue passing this baton, and she'll go over some polls.
Thanks so much, Alyssa and team, and welcome participants and longtime community call members. As you know, if you've been with us before, we like to start off usually with a poll. And our first question is, how many CRAC community calls have you attended? Go ahead and select which one applies best to you. And also for our poll today, we're going to go through the questions all at once and then results at the end. So please bear with us. So you'll see there the first question: how many CRAC community calls have you attended? And where are you joining us from today? The options there are available since it looks like I can already see the majority have been here before. There are a few who have not. And so your options, if you're not able to view, I think if you're calling in, is that an option now? I'm not too sure, but if it is, I can read off some of those options, just give you a little bit more time. For the first question is, how many CRAC community calls have you been part of before? And the options are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or more. Second question, where are you joining us from today? The East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, South, or other? The third question is, in what capacity are you joining us today? And the options are community-based organization, national organization, foundation, researcher, student, individual community member, or other. And our last question there, number 4, are what are the impacts of COVID-19 that you are seeing in your communities? And it is multiple choice, so you can select as many as you'd like where you're seeing that impact for yourself or in your community, and that's job layoffs, housing and or food insecurity, anti-Asian harassment and or hate crimes, issues with remote learning, continued education, increased fear of ICE, or other. And so we'll just give maybe 10 more seconds in case anyone is still deciding on their responses. All right, so we'll go ahead and close up the poll now. And I'm not sure if on your end you can see the results, but I can share out. If you can't see it now, we can definitely do so in the presentation later on too. And it looks like the majority of folks, 70%, are have been on our call before. A small percentage of 20%, this is your first time, so welcome for joining us. Fortunately, we have Zoom and we can see presenters. Previously, we were not able to do so, so welcome. And majority of folks are 60% joining from the West Coast. Welcome, West Coast folks. So there's East Coast representation at 20%, and also Midwest representation at 20%. In terms of background, we do have the majority joining from community-based organizations. Definitely love to have our partners and past participants, alums joining us, so welcome if you are here. There's 30% from national organizations, 10% students, and 10% from individual and community members. Welcome all. In terms of COVID impact, and this has been such a interesting, heavy, very eventful year, to say the least. So we do recognize there's also a lot our community needs, and thank you for sharing where it's resonating with you for how COVID is impacting you. 90%, we have a high response rate to issues with remote learning and continued education, which we recognize in terms of a lot of our students being impacted in the community. As well as 80% in job layoffs and housing and or food insecurity at 80%, 60% in increase of fear of ICE, as well as 50% at anti-Asian harassment or hate crimes. That are all the issues that have been resonating. Thank you for sharing that. Typically, we like to share out resources and different action items that CRAC has worked with partners, as well as a platform for all of you to share what your work is as well in addressing a lot of these issues. So thank you for joining us today on that. There was a 10% of folks who clicked other. So if there's time later on, if you'd like to share with us what those other areas are, we'd love to hear it. Thank you again for participating in the polls. I will go ahead and pass it back to Alyssa, who can get us started on some of our policy updates.
Thanks, Sina. And before we head into the elections piece, I also did want to open up the floor for folks just to share, not necessarily in a poll format, but just more open-ended via the chat function. Let us know what your most pressing questions or your community members' most pressing questions or concerns are regarding the election. Hopefully we cover some of that or share resources in the election section, but at the end of the webinar, if we can go over those to help you all out, we'd love to. So yeah, feel free to shoot those to us in the chat function, and we can, get to them hopefully at the end. And with that, I will start in on our civic engagement initiatives. So as I mentioned, first up, we will dive right into the election, since I know that's probably at the forefront of folks' minds right now. So the first thing I wanted to share are voting resources that are available specific to SCA and API communities. The first one being our in-language voter guide. We created this and we are able to offer it in Hmong, Khmer, Lao, Mien, and Vietnamese with both text and audio versions. So we are really happy to be able to share those with you all to hopefully help your community members, your families, your networks make an informed vote in the presidential election. And yeah, Gina will be sharing the links to some of these items in the chat function as well. The second item that I want to go over is our Vote Early Digital Toolkit. So this covers topics such as trusting vote by mail, what to expect on election night, your voting rights, and a fact check on all the things that are being said about this election. And really just to encourage early voting if it's still possible in your state. And it has sample social media posts and graphics to help you spread the word to your networks. And the last thing that is new that was just circulated this week are some pre-election day talking points from our partners at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. And those talking points are actually available in Khmer, Hmong, and Vietnamese as well. So if you want to share those with your community members, those are also available, and Gina will be circulating that in the chat as well. Yeah, so the next item I wanted to go over is just some voting rights that you all should know and your loved ones should hopefully know to remind you about your rights as a voter. And these are courtesy of ACLU and our partners at AAJC as well. So the first one is just about, being questioned about your political beliefs by anyone at the polling site. You have the right, you do not need to respond. And they shouldn't be doing that in a certain vicinity of the polling site anyways. If you are in line to vote and you're voting in person and the polls close, you have the right to stay in line and cast your vote so long as you're in line by the time that deadline is hit. And if you make a mistake on your ballot, you have the right to request a new one. So there should be a chief election officer there who can, quote unquote, spoil your ballot with a mistake and you get a new one. And if your machines at the polling place at your location are for some reason down, you have the right to a paper ballot. So I'm actually working the polls here in my local area too, and we went over, what happens if 6 a.m. hits and a machine is not working for some reason. So they have, emergency ballots in stock on paper ballots that, we can start voting at 6 a.m. even if it's on the curb. And the last one is, knowing that I think a third was the quote of Asian American voters are limited English proficient. And, that might affect someone in your family and your community. So just wanted to remind folks that you have the right to bring someone into the voting booth with you to help you cast your ballot. So this applies to folks who need assistance because of blindness, a disability, problems with literacy, and that includes voters who have difficulty with English. So definitely want to reiterate that, since we know that is prevalent sometimes in Southeast Asian American communities. So those are just some voting rights I want you to keep in mind. And yeah, this is just to reiterate, if you need any assistance, you have the right to bring someone in with you to cast your vote. And if you are voting in person, since we are less than a week out, just some reminders, typical of COVID times, so hopefully folks are practicing this not just at the polls, but reminder to wear your mask over your nose and your mouth, to use hand sanitizer. But for paper ballots, if that's what's being used at your location, sometimes they should be asking you to wait for them to dry because they can damage the paper. But using hand sanitizer, avoiding touching your mask or your face, and maintaining a 6-foot distance between you and others. And your polling location should be set up to think of these distancing precautions. So hopefully that is already laid out clearly for you when you get there. We also recommend being aware of the documents that you need to vote in your state, even if your state doesn't require a photo ID necessarily. Definitely knowing what you need to bring and where your polling place or your drop box is located. We also wanted to uplift the voter hotline, 1888 API vote. So that has bilingual assistance available in certain languages, but in terms of Southeast Asian languages, it's available in Vietnamese. So if you have any problems, not just on election day, but leading up to it or afterwards, if you have problems with your ballot, you can definitely give them a call and get some assistance. We also want to acknowledge that, a lot of folks and our community members are located in California. So we wanted to uplift our recommended California voter guide, which was put together by folks at AAPI's for Civic Engagement. So Gina has a link to that as well. If you're mailing in your ballot in California, it has to be postmarked by November 3rd. If you're dropping it off, obviously you want to bring it to an official polling place, county elections office, or county drop box. And those should be accepted any time before 8 p.m. on November 3rd. There's also ways to track your ballot's whereabouts and its status, and we have that link for you as well. If you happen to be voting in person, California has same-day voter registration available at polling places or county elections offices. And in California, you're not required to show ID in most polling places, but you should bring some type of documentation with your name and photograph. So these are just some examples of what you can bring in lieu of an ID. And so those links should be chatted to you. If for some reason, you have any problems, again, we encourage you to use the voter hotline that we uplifted. The next item we wanted to definitely go over today is what to expect on election night. So we know, this is obviously not a normal election, even without COVID. So just wanting to help manage both you and your community members' expectations for election results. So just some of the top line messaging that we want to share with you all and encourage you to share with your community members is the fact that we have to count every ballot that is cast. And in this election, because of absentee ballots, because of the coronavirus, it's going to take election officials longer to just verify and count everything. And that is going to affect when the results come in, obviously. We do not expect election results on that night or even the next day necessarily. So we are just wanting to inoculate you all with that information and make sure that it's completely normal for the election results to not be announced in the normal time period this year. And that is a sign that our democracy is working, because we want to make sure that every vote is counted, every voice is heard, and every absentee ballot is properly accounted for. So just wanted to uplift those messaging points, and hopefully that helps you communicate as well with your personal networks or your community members to make sure that folks aren't, losing trust in the system because it doesn't pan out as it has as quickly in other years. So just wanted to inoculate you all with that and hopefully help you all spread the word to your own community members. And this next graphic is just, why it's going to take so long, because of all the extra security measures, of the higher volume of absentee ballots. It's just going to take longer, and that's okay. And with that, I will wrap up the elections piece. I know we didn't cover everything, so again, if you have any pressing concerns or questions that were not covered in that section, feel free to shoot it to us in the chat. But for now, I will move on to the 2020 census, which has been personally, a big rock on my plate for the past year or more, but just wanted to go over what's next for the census. So just an update on what happened since we last touched base in September. The Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to end the census count earlier than October 31st. So they basically, stayed that part of a lower court ruling earlier. And they allowed the Trump administration to uphold their apportionment data reporting deadline of December 31st of this year. With that ruling, the Census Bureau concluded their field data collection operations on October 15th rather than October 31st, and are now in the phase of data processing and quality assurance. The current standing data reporting deadlines are listed here. So for apportionment, which is the population totals that will decide the number of seats in the House of Representatives each state gets, That's at the end of this year. In terms of redistricting, those totals are due at the end of April in 2021. The Census Bureau is attempting to complete these crucial processes, which typically take 6 months, in a mere 2 months, and deliver data for apportionment by the end of this year. So in coalition with other civil rights organizations, we urge Congress to extend the statutory deadlines for delivering apportionment and redistricting data by 120 days each, and to give the Census Bureau the time it needs to produce the most accurate census data possible. And that letter, Gina also has the link to that, so she can share that with you. And we just wanted to uplift, what are the key messages as we, call on our senators to do their job, to really take advantage of the tool in their toolbox to fix this legislatively. So we urge you all to contact your senators, tell them to support this solution to extend those data reporting deadlines. There is a standalone 2020 Census Deadline Extensions Act, which has bipartisan support. So we urge them to either pass that or to include those provisions of that bill in the next COVID relief package. And as you all know, I know many of you are familiar with these community calls, so you've been hearing about the census for quite a few months now, but the data will impact SCA communities and other communities of color for the next 10 years. So the fact that the Census Bureau is trying to rush these processes that make sure, whatever data was even collected in this kind of crazy year is good, is quality, and they're running the proper checks to make sure that that data is not going to shortchange our communities. So that's just a way to take action to make sure that those reporting deadlines are extended and they use that tool. All right, rolling right along, it would be crazy if we didn't acknowledge this next piece of news on the community call for this month. So as many of you have probably already seen, there was a Supreme Court confirmation earlier this week. So the Senate confirmed Justice Amy Coney Barrett to a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court by a vote of 52 to 48. Mostly along party lines, with Senator Susan Collins of Maine as the sole Republican no vote. We obviously denounced this rushed confirmation process, which occurred just 8 days before the election, and at a time where there have already been 60 million votes cast in that election. And rather than prioritizing much needed COVID relief legislation, they prioritized this confirmation, and they then went into a recess until November 9th. So obviously, if any of you are familiar with what happened in 2016, this decision to confirm Amy Coney Barrett is completely contradictory to the statements that were made in 2016 for the Merrick Garland process. So we do want to call out that hypocrisy there. And, acknowledge what's at stake. So Justice Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation jeopardizes many civil rights issues for decades to come, and that includes the Affordable Care Act, immigration, affirmative action, same-sex marriage, and Roe v. Wade. So we just want to take time now to acknowledge that, I'm sure many of us and many of you on the call are enraged, you have a lot of grief or anxiety around this confirmation. So one way to take action is to vote in the 2020 election so that we can have representatives both in the White House and in Congress that actually reflect the will of the people and the will of Southeast Asian Americans. So we'll definitely keep y'all posted if there's anything else that you can do, but we definitely want to get out the vote to make sure that folks who do these type of things that are against the will of the people and against what the country actually needs are in office to be able to do that. All right, so I will jump now into COVID-19 relief. So the first thing I want to go over is the current relief and what is still in effect. So just to kind of set the baseline understanding, we still have federal student loan deferrals until the end of this year, and that includes interest. Also, the CARES Act eviction moratorium has been extended through the end of this year. And just to clarify, that does not prevent the accrual of rent, and renters may be required to pay that rent back in full after it expires. And that is just a little caveat that we wanted to make sure folks are aware of. In terms of deferring evictions, this is for folks who expect to earn no more than $99,000 or $198,000 if you're filing a joint tax return for this year. You are not required to report any income in 2019 to the IRS. Or if you received a stimulus check from the CARE Act and now are unable to pay your rent or your full housing payment due to reasons such as substantial loss of income, loss of hours or wages, being laid off, or other extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. So those are just some of the conditions or situations where you can defer your eviction. In the next slide, we have updates on economic impact payments, or more commonly called stimulus checks. So the IRS actually extended the deadline to help non-filers receive their payment or receive their stimulus check. So that deadline is now November 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern. And this is additional time for those who have not received a stimulus check and who don't normally file a tax return. So this new date will provide an additional 5 weeks beyond the original deadline of October 15th. And again, this is for those who have not received their stimulus check and don't normally file a tax return. And for taxpayers who requested an extension of time to file their 2019 tax return, that deadline date remains past, so October 15th. The IRS urges people who don't typically file a tax return and haven't received their payment to register as quickly as possible using the non-filers enter info tool. So Gina, I think, just chatted that to you all. And this tool will be open only through November 21st. So if you are in this situation where you were a non-filer, if you were experiencing homelessness, or if you have incomes below these thresholds and you cannot be claimed as a dependent by someone else, definitely want to make sure that folks are aware to take advantage of this extension and to get that relief that you're entitled to. All right, so kind of rolling into HEROES Act 2.0. So that was current relief, that's what's still in effect, or that's what's being offered. And this is something that is on the table. So earlier this year in May, the House passed a previous iteration of the HEROES Act, but this new version was just passed earlier this month on October 2nd. So this is an updated and slimmed down version of the original HEROES Act. So it was slimmed down from $3.1 trillion to $2.2 trillion. And while its immigration language continues to hurt Southeast Asian Americans and immigrant communities, we do want to acknowledge that it is the most comprehensive relief package and that Americans need help now, especially given that most forms of relief have already expired and over 200,000 Americans have already died of COVID-19. We know that poverty is on the rise and the uninsured rate among all demographic groups have increased as well. So it's not perfect, but we definitely want to support what it can do for our communities and other communities who are struggling disproportionately right now. So that's just an overview of our rationale behind it. In terms of key provisions, the first thing we'll go over is economic relief. So this package includes $1,200 stimulus checks, including for folks with individual taxpayer identification numbers. It also restores the $600 a week unemployment insurance supplement from September through January of 2021. It increased education funding to extend the suspension of federal student loan payments. So that suspension of federal student loan payments that I mentioned in current relief, this package proposes to extend that through this package. In terms of increased funding for rental assistance and ownership, it prevents the shut-off of utilities and it enacts a year-long eviction and foreclosure moratorium. This package also increases funding for programs like SNAP and WIC. In terms of health protections, the package offers free coronavirus treatment through Medicaid, regardless of immigration status and including uninsured people. It through Medicaid, Medicare, Medicare Advantage, group and individual market health plans, TRICARE, Veterans Affairs, and federal employees' health benefits. It also authorizes coronavirus treatment reimbursement if you are uninsured. It also creates special enrollment periods for Medicare and the Affordable Care Act, and it provides the maximum subsidy for unemployed workers through the Affordable Care Act. It also includes the COVID-19 Every Worker Protection Act, which requires an emergency occupational safety and health administration standard within 7 days and a permanent infectious disease standard within 2 years. It also protects workers from retaliation from their employer if they were to report infection control problems at their workplace, and it requires the CDC to collect and investigate reports of work-related COVID-19 transmissions. So these are protections that will help folks. We know that a lot of SEA community members in the farming or the meat packing industries, we don't want them to be fearful of speaking up when there are, control problems at their work sites, and this protects folks in those situations from being able to blow the whistle on some of those practices that are putting some of our community members in harm's way. So those are the health protections. And in terms of taking action, we definitely want you to call on your senators to pass COVID relief legislation and to pass the HEROES Act, because Americans need COVID relief. Republican Senate leadership, as you all might have seen, they continue to refuse to move this needed comprehensive relief package. And as I mentioned, they prioritize the Supreme Court confirmation instead, and now they're in recess until November 9th. So we just want to encourage folks to continue to apply pressure to their lawmakers to do their jobs and to give the people in this country what they need to survive, and not a Supreme Court justice that obviously is going to not do those things. So with that, I will pass it over to Sina, who is going to go over our partner campaigns.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. I know that was so many updates, so I'm happy to take over to give some on the partner campaign. And goodness, we're at the end of the year, and so much has happened and still happening. We have elections next week. So to the question, just to remind folks to use the chat box and let us know what's happening in your community and what questions you may have around elections, and what you're doing as well. So happy to get to that at the end with questions. With partner campaigns, we've seen also a lot of new action items that was very concerning for CRAC as well as the community. The first one that some of you folks may already be familiar with if you're in tune with our newsletters and following us on social media. We've been really supportive of a group in North Carolina and in Philadelphia who are organizers and partners with us at Via Lead, SEAC Village, and Charlotte Uprising. They have been using their constitutional rights to protest some of the policies that Alyssa has gone over in terms of hurting our communities, and in particular from ICE, who have been targeting our Southeast Asian community members for detention and deportations, especially in the environment right now of COVID in the prison system. There has been heightened concerns from organizers. So there was peaceful protests from this group, and in retaliation, arrests have been happening to the group. And so along with community groups across the country who just went into action to defend the group, they do have charges still, and would appreciate community members and support from our base to contact. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. In our action alert, we put together the drop charges alert, but in detail, you can call, email, tweet, in particular, the Commonwealth Attorney Shannon Taylor. Right now, we're hoping to support the group in just getting the charges dropped. mainly because it's quite possible that with pressure, we're able to come together to support the group in making this a possibility. We know other organizers across the country have also been targeted, but with the outpouring of support from the community and allied organizations, this particular group has gained a lot of traction. And so we're really, really happy and excited to see that there is traction and there's people speaking out for them too, and would like to continue to uplift this. So the information will be shared from Gina with all the links if you need it, and it's there for you in the presentation as well on the steps you can take to sign the petition, to follow the groups to support them. They have really appreciated seeing all of the outpouring of support and letters, calls, social media messages. So if we can continue the pressure, that would be really helpful. We hope to see the charges dropped before the end of the year. And next, along with those unfortunate situation that we found our organizers found themselves in, we also saw that there was many other campaigns that needed to be uplifted as well from our partner orgs. I would like to say there are many families who are impacted by deportation and detention at this time by immigration. However, these are the campaigns in which our partners are working on and have developed toolkits and reached out to our base and CRAC for support as well. And so if you know of other campaigns you'd like to get on our radar, please do send them over to us too. We're happy to work with you and help uplift as well. Just a few of them here that is right now at the forefront is a Lumian refugee, Kao Seli. He is being supported by Advocates for Lumen, or AIM, California, and our partners at Asian Law Caucus. And his campaign has received a lot of media coverage and outpouring of support as well from the community in signing the petitions, getting out his story. He was a firefighter during his time of incarceration, and now he's facing deportation. Definitely unjustly, as all of the impacted community members we have served their time, and we are seeking for their release to be reunited with their families. And so we have that situation with a few of these other campaigns with Onion. His campaign is Keep On Home, and via RISE, our partners in California, are anchoring his pardon campaign there in the first bullet point. We have Tien Ho in Seattle at the Northwest Detention Center, and she is seeking release as well from detention to be reunited with her family, and her campaign is linked. We also have Asian Prisoner Support Committee, APSC, in California, who is working on pardon campaigns for the right to return, which are deportees in Cambodia, to have them fight their cases and overturn the charges to be able to receive pardons and return back to California. There is Laotian community member Sakone, Lhasa Phang Dong, I apologize if I didn't correctly pronounce, but Sakone is a community leader in the Bay Area, and his pardon campaign is linked as well. And we also have Danny Samdang Thangsi, who's Laotian American community leader as well, supported by Asian Law Caucus and APSC in California. So very important to know of their stories, and that our Southeast Asian communities who are impacted by deportation deserve the right to due process. And in due process, oftentimes we find their cases are eligible for pardons, clemency, post-conviction relief, and it's a matter of our community speaking out for them. And fortunately, legal aids who have stepped in to also give that extra support of representing them and advocating for them as well. So Thank you to partner organizations. Thank you to legal aids and community members. Continue to speak out, and I hope you do share their stories. And again, please send us any other campaigns that we may not have listed here and you'd like to get visibility and support for. With an eye for time, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Alyssa to go over any announcements.
Thanks, Sina, and really great to have those partner campaign updates. I think it's really important to keep those in mind, even in the midst of, these national things happening. Just really good to have space to invite folks on the call to participate in those campaigns as well. In terms of announcements, the only one for today is, teeing up for next month. We want to make sure that folks put on their radar that the Affordable Care Act open enrollment begins November 1st. So during this weekend, I believe. The federal deadline is December 15th, and the California deadline is the end of January. I wanted to also share that you can check healthcare.gov if you have, if your state has a state-specific portal, and I know Gina will be chatting those dates and deadlines in the chat for you all as well. The last thing for this section is just some resources that came through my inbox today from the National Patient Advocate Foundation. One being a step-by-step guide for choosing a plan. So, this it'll walk you through how to compare plans and how to choose a plan through the ACA. There's also a webinar that they're hosting today immediately after this call, actually, just an ACA 101 webinar to get acquainted with the ins and outs of it. So those are just 2 resources we wanted to share, and definitely wanted to put that on everyone's radar, even if it's not for you personally. If you know someone in your community who should be aware of this enrollment period opening this weekend, please do amplify that to them. That kind of wraps up the meat of this presentation. So we can now open up the line for questions from you all. If you all have anything that I might have missed in the chat while I was speaking, if Gina or Sina has seen them. But if you have any questions regarding anything that we talked about or even didn't touch base on this call, please feel free to shoot those to us in the Q&A function. Or if you would like to, share verbally, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute your line. So we will give folks a few minutes to brainstorm, and then we'll compile anything that we've seen come in on our end as well. In terms of elections, we can share what CRAC is planning in case it's helpful, because we know there's a lot of uncertainty that might swirl around, especially with election results that don't come as quickly as they usually do. So we will be releasing e-blast to just provide some sort of guidance or grounding in terms of what comes next. We're also talking with some of our partners, our community-based partners, to touch base with their executive directors to make sure that our strategies and we could provide spaces that would be most helpful for them. We'll also, depending on the outcome of the election, we'll have, we have underway preparation for a 100 days priorities list to hopefully be able to circulate to folks on the ground as well. So those are just some of the things in the works on our end that we can share, if that helps clarify what CRAC is planning to do. Any other ones from the Q&A?
Alyssa, if I can put forth a question here, is in terms of community calls, now that we've moved over to this new format where we're able to connect with participants with video, it looks like towards the end of the year as well, rounding out, will there be any other community calls for the end of the year?
Yeah, so we were thinking through this as a team in terms of capacity and what makes the most sense in terms of how we reach the most people. Right now, we don't have a November or like early December community call on the schedule. So this one is currently our last one of the year. But if if the election happens and you all are, wanting kind of a virtual space like this to come together again before we wrap up for the end of the year, feel free to reach out directly. But right now, our plan is to communicate mostly via email to be a little more conservative with our team's capacity at the end of the year with some of the year-end things we have on our plate. But we're definitely open to feedback if you all feel like you really want, this kind of space again. Let's see. Are there any ones that I'm not seeing in the Q&A function, Gina or Sina?
I just saw one from Kathy
Yeah.
Dung, and it was a question regarding elections, if you don't mind taking it, Alyssa. Kathy says, in the spirit of the upcoming election, are there any elections CRAC is following across the country?
That's a good question. Our main focus is really just the presidential election. In terms of state-specific elections, California is where we, probably have more of our critical mass. But in that circumstance, we really defer to our community partners there for their guidance, which is why we defer to APIs for civic engagements, voter guide, in terms of what's on the California ballot for propositions such as Prop 15, Prop 16 that really affect Southeast Asian Americans. In terms of like other state races where we don't have the infrastructure on our end to really keep too close of a pulse on that, but we definitely focus on California if we do any specific kind of following. But anything to add, Sina or Gina, or try to say all that we did?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also add that as a 501c3 organization, we're also not really allowed to dig our hands into these kind of some of these races that are quite contentious. But as Alyssa said, I think some specific things that we've kind of been keeping an eye on are the propositions that are rolling through in California, like Prop 15, which is the affirmative action one, I believe. So those are kinds of they're not elections, but things on the ballot that we're really keeping an eye on.
Yeah, kind of just jumping off. As a 501c3, we can only really share our analysis of these would be really good in the interest of the SCA community from our policy analysis. And this is where the folks stand on it. So that's really how we've kind of defined our niche. So yeah, kind of as Gina said, we can't really get too in the nitty gritty, but really just wanting to encourage folks to have all the information they need to make an informed vote and to vote comfortably and safely in their own capacity. Any other questions for the last 11 minutes or so before we have to hop off? Again, oh, go ahead.
As maybe questions continue to come in, if they do, I would like to just add on a little bit to that last question around elections. Since I work so closely with so many of our wonderful partners, I can definitely say there's, as Gina mentioned, in California, robust civic engagement as well as election participation and pushing for Southeast Asian policymakers and representation there, as well as in Massachusetts, Washington State, Texas. So I've been seeing our partners doing really fantastic work in terms of advocating for the policies and elected officials and getting folks to run for office too. And so that's really exciting to see across the country, Southeast Asian representation in terms of elected officials potentially in this next week coming out with results on how they do in their campaigns. And we're happy to uplift partners' work. And so that's something we can do at CRAC if there are particular types of celebrations that is happening in the community around our community members or leaders who are taking the charge and leading in elections, then we're happy to share that out. But as Alyssa mentioned, we unfortunately we're not able to be partisan in those efforts.
All right, I will give folks maybe a couple more minutes to submit any questions, but if there are none that come through, I can give you all maybe 5 to 7 minutes back on your Thursday afternoon, but I'll give folks another couple minutes to submit any, and we'll try to get those. All right, well, I'm not hearing anything, but if you all think of anything else, if you are really adamant about wanting to kind of convene again before the end of the year, feel free to reach out. Again, as Sina mentioned, if you have any partner campaigns that you want us to help amplify, we'd be more than happy to. And as we head into the election next week, if you have any questions or any resources that would be helpful for you or for your community, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information is listed here. In terms of policy info, you can reach out to COM, you can reach out to NARI for immigration, and you can reach out to Mandy, our California director, if you have any further questions. But with that, I will give folks back 7 minutes on their Thursday, and we'll see you again in 2021. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Get out and vote.